Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. We're going to go ahead and get started. I wanted to thank everybody for joining me today. We're going to be going over what's new in MadCap Flare version 12. My name is Jennifer Morris. I'm a product evangelist here at MadCap Software. Excited to see some familiar names on the attendee list and also some new faces, so welcome everybody. I'm just going to cover a couple of housekeeping items before we begin. We have a few more folks. It looks like attendees are still rolling in, so we're going to give it a minute before we just dive in completely. Couple things. We are going to be recording this session. So for whatever reason, if you signed up and you couldn't make it, or if you have to drop out early, not a problem. When we're done, we'll be compiling the recording and sending it out to everybody. So you'll get a copy of the recording when we're done. There is a questions panel in the GoToWebinar. Would encourage you, as you have questions that come up, I would encourage you all to use that to ask them. We have a lot of folks joining us today, so I don't think we'll be able to get to all of them. I do have some folks helping me behind the scenes asking or answering questions that come up. Whatever we don't get to live today, we'll go ahead and compile a question and answer list for everybody, and we'll be sending that out. It may not be at the same time when we send out the recording, but hopefully shortly thereafter. So please don't be shy. Please feel free to ask questions about the product, licensing questions, anything like that. We're happy to help. All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Again, my name is Jennifer Morris. I'm a product evangelist here at MadCap. I'm going to go ahead and switch gears here and just one quick slide. So today we're going to talk about the major new features in Flare 12, which we released last week. We're very excited about it. A couple of overarching themes about this release. What we wanted to do going into this release is talk about and think about how can we make things a bit easier for the author? How can we make things more intuitive? How can we save clicks? These seem like really small things, but at the end of the day, they make a really big difference. You all are in this tool every day, so it's all about making it a little bit easier and saving a bit more time. So some of the things we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about the multilingual web and print publishing from a single target, so a new multilingual output from Flare 12. We're going to talk about the newly redesigned advanced style sheet editor. We're going to go into the new custom responsive layout editor. We're going to talk about improvements to snippets, including Snippet Conditions and Snippet Variables. We're going to talk a little bit about the preserving of track changes in our Flare project and preserving them when we go to Microsoft Word and when we go to PDF. We're going to talk about some glossary enhancements, and then we'll cover a few more things. All right, so with that, I'm going to put away PowerPoint, and I'm going to bring up Flare. So hopefully you can all see this here. Shout out in the questions panel if you can't, but hopefully you can all see my screen. The first thing I want to talk about is the new multilingual output in Flare 12. So what we did in this release is we made it easier to manage and produce multiple language outputs from a single master project. So as authors, you've always been able to produce multi-language outputs for all of the print and online targets. But what we did here is we made it easier to publish a collection of translated targets from a master language project. So what does this look like? Well, I'm going to go ahead and pull up a target here. I've got a top nav. One of the things we've got down in the target editor is this language tab. And when we click on this language tab, we have this new interface. What this lets us do is select or add projects to this list so that we can build the translated targets in those projects, all from this one master English. So in my example, I actually have a translated version of my source English project into Spanish, and I just simply added it to this list. If I have others that I want to build, all I have to do is come over to this Insert a New Row button, and I can come here and I can actually browse to any project that I want. So I'm going to go ahead and build this so we can take a look at what that looks like. Oops, I forgot to delete this guy because I'm not going to build him. So when we build, what it's actually going to do is it's not only building the output from my source English project, but it's also grabbing the output or the target from my Spanish project and building it as well. So let's pull that up and have a look. I'm going to drag him over. Sorry, he's on my other screen. So the one thing you'll notice is we've got this nice little button here. So as a user, if I click this button and if I hover, it gives me an indication of what's going to happen. I can switch languages. So here's my English, my default, but I've also got my project in Spanish. So I can toggle between them as a user. If you haven't already asked this question, I'm going to go ahead and ask it for you all. This button, can I change it? I don't like it. It looks boring. I want to do something else. The answer is yes. There's a lot of things you can customize about this. This is simply a toolbar button that we have that we've told Flare to include. I just kept all the default settings in my example, but like I said, you can edit a lot of things about this little button, including what it looks like. It's simply an image, and you can swap it out with any image you want in your skin editor. So whether you're using the tri-pane or the top nav, it's just editing one of the styles, which is very easy to do. All right, the other thing I wanted to point out about our online outputs is that the output will detect the user's system locale and open the appropriate language. So if you have your project translated into German and you've published that, if I have a German system, when I open it up, it'll default to that language. If no language is found, then it will simply open to the default language that you've got set. So in addition to the online outputs, this is also supported in our print-based outputs. And I want to talk a little bit about PDF because this is kind of neat. So I'm going to pull up my PDF target. And again, same thing. We've got this language tab, and I can add any project that I want, and it'll build the PDF targets in those projects. And just like in my online, the order of my projects here actually determines the order that will show up in the table of contents. So that's one little thing to point out. Again, if you wanted to add more, you could simply click that little button and insert additional projects. So I'm going to go ahead and build this, and we're going to talk about a couple things. So how it's done in PDF is similar to how we supported PDF stitching in version 11, but it's actually better. So let's take a look at what this looks like. And I'll make this a little bit bigger, and hopefully you all can see this. Let me scrunch it down just a skosh. All right. So again, we not only built that English PDF, but we built the translated PDF targets as well. We didn't have to build them separately and sew them together after the fact. One of the nice things about doing it this way is that in these multiple PDFs that we've sewn together, the page numbering flows properly. So you're not left with a PDF in English, for example, that's page 1 through 3. And then we come upon Spanish, and it's also page 1 through 3. And then French, which is page 1 through 3. Everything flows appropriately. We can see this here in the table of contents. So English is going to start on page 2, Spanish is going to start up on page 6, and French on page 10. So if we come down here, and if you look at the bottom of every topic, you can see that my page number flows better. So it just reads a lot better and a little bit more professional when you're doing it this way. You know, imagine that install guide that comes in that box of that electronic device that you just purchase, or maybe that piece of furniture that you have to put together with an Allen wrench. Oftentimes those manuals come with every single language compiled in them and bound together, but the pagination is always going to flow properly. So this feature makes it really easy for authors to do that. I do also want to point out, let me go back to Flare here, that while we're on the subject of this multilingual output, we now support smart quotes per language. This is important because quotation marks actually vary by language, and I didn't know this. This is simply an option we can set in Flare, and when we enable it, Flare will replace the standard English straight quotes that we're used to seeing if you are writing in a American English setting, to whatever the project language is. And the way we do that is we'll come up to the File menu, and it's down here in the Options dialog. So when we invoke this in the XML editor, there's an option here we can check that replaces the straight quotes with smart quotes. And that's for the whole project. If you've got your project language set, let's say for French, and if you enable this, it'll use the French version of those quotes. So that's also quite handy. Now, I would be remiss not to mention our Mad translation services. I have to give a shameless plug. If anybody on the call has any curiosity or interest in translating any of their content into multiple languages, or if you're already doing that and you're interested in perhaps a competitive quote, we offer a full Mad translation service. We have a full, we act as a full language service provider. So feel free to contact me after that. I'll put you in touch with my colleague that manages that. All right, so shameless salesperson plug over. We'll go ahead and continue on. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is the advanced style sheet editor. I think this is probably my favorite new feature. So let's pop over to our style sheets and have a look at what that looks like. So I'm going to open up my style sheet. Couple things I want to point out. One of the, and these are small things, but again, it's these little things that I think make a big difference, particularly if you're a newer user or newer on your path to CSS Ninja status like I am. So a few things. We've redesigned the display of the property. So what does that mean? Well, if we take a look and we open up font here in my H1, this will look a little bit different. If you used older versions of Flare, there wasn't this sort of obvious indicator here that I can click this little pull down or hit this button if I want more colors or click this little ellipsis button with more choices. It was sort of this colorless screen, and if you're really new to Flare, you almost had to stumble upon and accidentally click in that area to know that something could be changed. Well, now we've made it a lot more obvious that there are properties here, and there are actually things you can select and change. So that's one thing that I really like. The other thing we've allowed or enabled here is the ability to toggle between a grouping of the properties and an alphabetized view. So in the past, we always had this filter up here where we can see set properties, relevant properties. There was another option in there that showed everything alphabetically. But what that did is that pretty much dumped every single style into this alphabetized list right here. Well, what if I just want to look at my set properties? Now what I can do is just for the H1s in my style sheet, I can toggle between a grouping or an alphabetized list of all the properties. So it just makes it a little bit easier to manage. The other thing is we've added these handy expand all and collapse all buttons. So if I wanted to expand out everything, I can see what's going on at a quick instance, or I can shrink it back down using the collapse all button. And the last little thing here is we have this property control. So if I'm only looking at what's set in my style sheet, but there's a particular property I want to add, even if it's not set, I can hit this little pull down menu and choose anything I want, and it'll show up in this list. So that's a handy usability improvement. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is the ability to put conditions on styles. I have to admit, this one was a little bit of a mind bender for me at first, but after talking to a lot of authors, talking to folks who've been using Flare for some time, I can see how this can be really useful. And I'd love to get your feedback on this and hear about other ways that you all think this could be helpful. So this feature, I think, can be really handy for things like author notes or content perhaps that you want to mark as do not distribute. You know, as a writer, you may have content that's for internal eyes only, maybe just for your engineering team, or maybe they're just for your own internal eyes as you're developing and creating this content. You don't even want anybody else to see. So in my example, I wanted to create author notes that I could add all over my content, and I never wanted to have the external world see them. So let's take a look at what I did. I actually went in and I made a class of my P style. And what I did, if we open him up here, and here he is, I created P.note. And I applied some stylistic properties here. I'll expand them out so you can see what I've done. Let me get rid of him so we have a little bit more real estate. All right, so here are the settings I applied to this particular note style. I wanted it to have, I wanted to stand out. I have a yellow background, a little green border. I've got my text in here. But one thing you'll notice is this new property down here called MC Conditions. And what this lets me do is apply a conditional marker to the particular style. So if I click this box, this will come up. Here are the conditional tag sets. I created one called Do Not Distribute. You can name it anything you want that makes sense. That just sort of made sense to me. I gave it a blue background, and I applied it to the style. So now with the condition already applied to the style, we can use this note everywhere, and it reduces the chance of me forgetting to apply a conditional marker to it. So let's take a look at that. Let's go into a topic, and I'd like to add that. So I'm going to right-click here on my P tag and insert that class that I created, and it's there. Now I can add whatever I want. So check with R&D. Okay, so I can drop this style class anywhere I want, and the conditional marker is already applied, which again saves me some steps. So in Flare 11 and earlier, you could do this, but you'd have to again create the style, apply the style to the text, and then apply that condition tag every time you wanted to use it. Now, again, that condition is already on that styled element, and I've saved myself a lot of clicks. So when I produce any output that's going to go outside of the building, I can have this Do Not Distribute tag automatically excluded. And then for any internal review type targets that I'm producing, I can have it included so that it shows up. Or maybe it's not going to show up anywhere. I just want it in my editor. So again, this was designed to save a little bit of time. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about, let's come back over to my style sheet. I want to talk about the ability to have multiple medium types in a single view. I think, I mentioned this is, the style sheet editor, probably some of my favorite new features. I love this one. Now with Flare 12, you can show all the medium types you have in place for a single style sheet, and then you can scroll through the settings collectively. Everything stays in sync, and see what's happening in the different groupings. So for those of you who may not be familiar, a medium is simply an alternate group of settings in a style sheet. So for example, you may have a print medium of your style sheet, and that print medium may have different characteristics than your online output. Maybe your fonts are going to be a serif type font. Your online, the online medium of your style sheet is going to maybe have a sans serif type font. And so all different settings can be adjusted based on your medium, but you're still maintaining a single style sheet. So when you build your print-based outputs, for example, you can tell your Flare target to use the print medium of your style sheet so that those effects show up. What I think is so handy is that now you can expose your medium types together. And as I mentioned, all the columns stay in sync. So what does that look like? So I'll pop up here, and this may look familiar to you. We always had the toggle between the different mediums in our style sheet. But now I can actually select print medium and have it show up side by side with my default. I thought this was brilliant. I hopefully that a lot of you experienced users out there will find this useful as well. Inevitably, maybe all of you have experienced this. You may have wanted to make a change in your style sheet, but you're accidentally in the wrong medium because you forgot to toggle or you forgot to switch. I would often get extremely frustrated because I wasn't seeing the results that I would expect. Now that we can see our medium types together, it helps us eliminate any gotchas ahead of time. So I can see right away what's going on in my default and in my print medium. So maybe I want my print to be something else, or maybe the color of my H1s to be something else in my print medium. I can simply change it here, and I get a nice little preview of what's happening. So this is a great way to see this holistic view of what's happening in all the different mediums of my style sheet. It kind of helps keep you in check, hopefully keep you out of a little bit of trouble. So the next thing I want to talk about, I'll put him away here. The next thing I want to talk about is support for media queries. So media queries are very similar to the style sheet mediums I just talked about. Just like a medium, you can have an alternate group of settings for these different media queries. The difference is that with a media query, you don't have to explicitly tell the Flare target to use it, like you do with like a print medium, for example. For a media query, it just happens automatically. The query itself is actually tied to the display width on the device. So again, this kind of thing comes in really handy if you're writing in a responsive world, or if you have a need to be mindful of writing content in a responsive fashion. You can have different CSS settings change depending on the display width, and all the settings will change automatically. So if your user is looking at content on a mobile phone, your font colors may be slightly different than when they're looking at it on a web browser. And again, it's tied to the device, so you don't have to tell Flare to do anything. It'll just happen automatically. So prior to Flare 12, media queries could be manually entered into a text editor. But again, for a lot of folks, coding that kind of stuff into a text editor may seem a little bit scary, not so fun. What we've done in Flare 12 is we've actually baked in some common media queries for you to use so that you don't have to code them. And that includes tablet and mobile. So let's bring them up. Just like I could split my view here and show my print medium, I'd like to show my tablet medium and also my mobile one. So now I can see everything at once, and I can make settings and stylistic changes across all of these different devices, and I can see how things are going to take effect. So maybe here I don't want it to be blue. We'll make it a nice purple color. Maybe in my mobile version I don't want it to be, oops, sorry, wrong area. I'd like to have it be black. All right, so you can add additional mediums if you want. You simply come up here to the options dialog and add medium, and here I can choose whether I want to add another medium or a media query. You'll most likely be able to do everything you need with just the tablet and mobile media queries provided. So the tablet media query is kind of obvious. It's designed to be used on medium-sized screens like iPads, and then the mobile media query is designed to be used on smaller screens like smartphones. So the tablet and mobile media queries are still tied to those responsive output settings in the skin tab of your target editor. So if we pop over here quickly, if we look at this target, if we go to the skin settings, we've actually put the snap points in there for you. You can adjust them if you want, but out of the box, they're already programmed in, so you really don't have to think about it. All right, so let's go back to our style sheet. We made a couple changes to these different mediums that we would like to see take effect. We talked about how these styles, or how styles can change automatically depending on the device. It's also really important to consider the structure of the content on the page. So in a responsive world, you need to be mindful of how content will need to shift and change when you view this information on different devices. So this is especially important when you're using things like images throughout your content, or perhaps you're embedding tutorials or videos into your topics. That kind of thing brings me to the next important feature of Flare 12, which is our new responsive layout editor. So I'm just going to switch gears for a minute and put away my style sheet. We'll go ahead and make that change. So I have a topic that I want to talk about here. This is just a really simple example. And again, this whole notion of responsiveness, this is a great feature for anybody who's creating content for an audience where responsiveness is crucial. So we introduced the ZERB Foundation framework in Flare 11. We provided templates for the author to use to get started. If any of you tinkered with Flare 11, if you started a brand new project, you could do it based on one of the factory templates that we provided. I think we had ones called Top Nav Advanced and Top Nav Basic, and they looked beautiful. But all of those were built using that ZERB Foundation framework. It got a little bit tricky if as an author, maybe you wanted to deviate a little bit from that template. Maybe you wanted to create your own responsive topics from scratch. You really had to know how to code in whatever responsive framework you were using, Bootstrap or Foundation, and you had to be comfortable working in Flare's code editor to make stylistic changes and structural changes to the page. So, you know, depending on your skill set, if you knew how to do that, that was fantastic. If you didn't, it often meant enlisting the help of a web developer who knew that type of framework under the hood, or anybody who was comfortable coding. So for a lot of us mere mortals out there, that was a little bit of a challenge. So what we wanted to do was simplify it, make it easier for the author to manage the structure of the content on the screen so that everything responds appropriately. So what am I talking about? Well, up in the Home tab here, we have this new option to invoke the responsive layout editor. And I'm going to go ahead and pull him up here, and hopefully you can see this. The basis of this editor is this 12-column grid system, or a row with 12 imaginary columns. The purpose of that grid is to contain or hold content. So why do we do that? Well, the benefit of that grid structure is it allows your content to respond when presented on these different screen widths. So let's talk about this topic. In my very simple example, I created a single row with 3 containers, and I simply dropped in some images. And then in my style sheet, not in anything in the code, I just made a few stylistic changes to these cells, just for some visual effects, and we'll take a look at that. I did it all using this editor and my style sheet. I didn't code anything. If I wanted to create a different row style, I simply come up here and hit New Style. Flare's going to present us with this dialog. Now, it's going to fill in some text here for the class name of the row. You can name it whatever you want. But what's great is we've also given you some templates where you can choose. In my example, I just created it based on this 444. So essentially, you're creating a 1-row grid with 3 cells. Each cell has 4 imaginary columns in it. And this gives us a preview of what it looks like in our web browser and in our tablet. And then when we switch to mobile, each cell is going to take up 12 columns, because remember, we're basing this on a 12-column grid. And so we get a nice little preview of what it's going to look like on a smaller screen width. Here's one that's 6 by 6. So this is a 1-row with 2 cells, each cell taking up 6 columns. And now we have this preview here in the web and in our tablet, and of course what it's going to look like, how these 2 cells are going to stack if viewed on a mobile. And again here, this example, 8 and 4. So again, 1 row, 2 cells. The first one's going to take up 12 columns, the second one 4. And now we can preview what these 2 cells are going to look like in a mobile device. So if you wanted to continue to add rows and build your own styles, you can using the new style. But I created my row. I dropped in my images. I want to just point out a few effects. We can use this responsive layout editor to adjust and change a lot of things. We can add some cell offset. We can add some guttering between them, so as they stack, if you want to add some spaces in between them, you can. If you decide that one of these needs to move, I can simply click on Dave, for example. I may want to put him in the center. I can simply click this blue arrow and it'll move him to the right or the left or wherever I want to put him. So it just makes it much easier to manipulate. In Flare 11, a lot of this stuff, actually all of it, would have to be done in code if you decided you want to move around. So we wanted to really simplify it and create UI on top of this notion of building content responsively. All right, so at the top of the editor, a couple buttons to point out. Here's where I can switch between how it's going to look in my web browser, how it's going to look in my tablet. And you'll notice as I switched to tablet, some stylistic things changed. I have some background colors that showed up. My text increased a little bit. And when I moved to mobile, it switched again. The cells stacked upon each other, so we have a structural change. And we also have other stylistic changes happening here. So my font got a little bit bigger. So this lets us emulate what's going to happen when viewed on different devices. You can also change it up here in the XML editor if you want, so you can toggle between these different layouts right from this button. So we give you both choices, but if you click it in one, your medium and your layout, everything's going to stay in sync, which is nice. So you'll notice that as I went from web to mobile, the flow of the cells changed noticeably. So you can see that these things stack upon on top of one another. Why is that? It did that because I told each cell to take up 12 of those imaginary columns. So here it is. It's taking up 12 columns. This guy is taking up 12 columns. And if we scroll down a little bit more, so is Manny. So that's why it's responding and stacking appropriately. So again, you notice that as the width of the screen changed, the formatting of the cells in terms of the size of the images, the background colors, the fonts, all of those stylistic things tie into those CSS media queries that we just talked about. So how it flows is controlled by what we set in the layout editor. The media query support in the CSS and the layout editor really tie together. So, you know, after the webinar, hopefully you'll have some time or you'll be encouraged to kind of play with this a little bit, but the two really work hand in hand. So again, when we're dealing with things like images or embedded videos on a page, you really have to be mindful of how it's going to flow. And as we're architecting everything, being able to switch between these views really helps eliminate any kind of gotchas ahead of time. What I'm going to do, I'm going to bring up a much more elegant example. If I pop up to the Flare help system here, we'll go to madcapsoftware.com, and let's go up to the help for MadCap Flare 12. This is the online help for Flare version 12. The whole output, or this whole responsive page, this top nav page, was completely designed in Flare using the new responsive layout editor. We had no intervention from our dev team. So we have a lot happening on this home page. We've got our PDF guides here on the right. We've got some embedded videos here. This is a good example because as we shrink this thing down, if you were to look at this on a much smaller screen, hopefully you can see this. I'll shrink him down. A little click happy. Let's make him a little bit more narrow. As we scroll down, we're going to see how everything on the page changes. All of these videos stack appropriately. They're not overlapping on top of one another. And again, this was all built using the foundation, this new responsive layout editor. So if you've got Flare version 12, if you have a chance to start any of the projects, from any of the templates that we provided, the top nav ones, if you take a look at that home page, it's a great way to sort of tinker and reverse engineer and see how they built these really elegant home pages. And you can edit them and tweak them as you want using this editor. You don't have to know the code and go under the hood or get the help of a web developer to help you manipulate and change it. So I'd encourage you all to check that out. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is snippet conditions. So in Flare 12, we extended the power of snippets and gave them a nice hefty polish. In fact, this came from a lot of requests from many of you out there, so I think this is a great feature. All right, so if you're not familiar, what is a snippet? A snippet is simply a reusable chunk of information, and we insert these snippets into our topics by reference. Snippets can be paragraphs long, they can be just a sentence, they can be an image, they can really be anything you want. But the beauty of them is they're inserted into our topics by reference. And why is that cool? Well, if it's information that you use over and over again, if any of that information changes, all we have to do is change it in the snippet file, and everywhere that snippet's used, those changes cascade. So let's take a look at what we've done. So I'm going to open up a snippet here. I want to point out just a couple little editor things. Again, these are, what did we do to save a few clicks? So I just want to point out a few things. If I want to insert a snippet into a topic, in fact, I can do this. Let's go ahead and come over here. If I want to add a snippet into a topic, I can do it a number of ways, and this really hasn't changed. I can drag the snippet over into my topic. I can come up to the Insert button, and I can hit Insert Snippet, or I can insert a snippet right from the XML editor, and we do that right here. So what we have done new is when we go to insert a snippet from the XML editor, you'll see that you'll have a list of recently used snippets, and you'll have the ability to pin snippets that you use often. Again, a little thing, but a suggestion that came from many of you, and I think this can really save a lot of time. So as your snippet library grows, it's a nice way to help keep yourself a bit organized. So I'm going to insert my snippet again right from my pinned list. All right, so what are we doing here? Well, we talked about inserting snippets a couple different ways. The real fun, in my opinion, is that now we can control conditions on snippets, but at the snippet block level. So imagine you have a procedure with a lot of common steps that you use over and over. Snippet is perfect for this. You'll all probably use this in your writing. In some cases, however, I may not need to use all of the steps in my snippet. It may be optional for my user, which is the example that I'm showing here. In the past, what I would have had to do in this instance is I would have had to have 2 snippets to maintain, one with all 4 steps and one with just 3 steps with that optional one removed. But with the improved snippet conditions, I have way more control over these handy little reusable objects, since now we can conditionalize content out right at the block level. So I'll pull up my, let me save him. Let me pull up my snippet again. So here's my snippet. This is the information that I'm going to use all over and over again. I don't want to have to retype it. You'll notice here, and it may be a little bit light through the GoToMeeting, but I've actually applied a conditional tag to this list item. So if I come down here to my conditions of this list item, I've actually created a separate conditional tag set called Snippet Conditions, so they don't cross with my regular conditional tag sets, just to help stay organized. And in my example, I created this condition called print. I gave it a purple color, and I applied it to that particular item. So now every time I use that snippet, that's going to show up. All right, so let's go back to our topic here. Now in my example, I've used this a couple times. I don't want that to show up in this particular one. I can actually control it and toggle it at the block level. So when you right-click at that snippet block, you'll have this option here called Snippet Conditions. And when I pull it up, I can tell Flare to exclude that condition. And what's going to happen is it's going to remove that step. My numbers self-heal, which is nice. I'm not left with 1, 2, 4. And I've only had to maintain 1 snippet, which saves me quite a bit of time. The other thing we've noticed here is I've got this little indicator. This tells me there's something going on and that I've actually got a snippet condition applied at that block level. If you're playing around with this and you've never seen this before, it may be because you don't have it turned on. Just go up to that show tags, so the little eyeball guy up in your XML editor, and when you click the little pull-down menu, just make sure you've got that indicator turned on. So that may be why you're not seeing it if you've been playing with it and have never seen that little icon before. All right, so in addition to being able to control snippet conditions at the snippet block level, we can also control variables that we use in snippets at the block level. So let me go back to my snippet. If you notice up here, I've got this gray, I've got the word name. It's got this sort of gray hashed over it. If I hover over it, Flare tells me that it's a variable. So what is a variable? We've always had support for variables. In fact, we've always had support for variables and snippets. A variable is simply a placeholder for text, especially handy when you have a string of text that maybe is going to change in the future. You're not sure what it's going to be. Maybe a product name or a version number that marketing may change on you at the 11th hour. You don't have to go into the 10,000 places where you've hand-coded the product name. You can just define that product name variable to be whatever you want, and it'll show up automatically everywhere it's used. So it saves a lot of time. So again, we've always been able to include variables and snippets, but we could only define what variables would say at the all-over project level, or we could override and define that variable when we actually build our target. So, if a particular target needs to have a different definition for whatever variables you have, you can override it when you build. That's all good stuff, but now we have this added control. So if we're using a variable in a snippet, we can adjust what the variable says in all the places we use that snippet in the topic and override it everywhere in the topic, or at the individual block level. So let's go back and have a look here. So in this example, maybe I've been told, you know what, Jen, we can't say the word name, we got to use username. So I could right-click on my topic, I can come into my properties, and at my variables here, here's the variable that I've inserted. I can actually define this to say username. So again, everywhere that snippet was used, it updated the placeholder and filled it in with username, because that's what I told it to do. But maybe marketing says, you know what, this was an optional step. We need this to say something else. We don't want it to say username. So I can actually control and toggle what that says at the block level. So I'll come into my block, just like I did with my snippet conditions. I've got this option here called Snippet Variables. And when I invoke this, my Snippet Variables selection will come up. I can actually call this something else. Maybe I want it to say credentials. And when I click OK, now I've just overridden what that variable is at that granular snippet block level. So again, a lot more control. Another quick note about variables, pretty much anywhere now that you can edit text in a dialog, you'll notice you'll have the ability to insert a variable. So if I were to insert a hyperlink right here, for example, I've got some editable text fields. You'll notice little icons like this where I can select a variable. So as you're working through Flare, if you're inserting things, again, pretty much anywhere you can edit text, you'll be able to insert a variable as well. So that's also new in Flare version 12. So again, a few extra little clicks we can save, ultimately saving some time. All right, I'm going to move on. The next thing we're going to talk about is the ability to preserve track changes in our Word and our PDF outputs. I have a really quick example here. I'm going to pull up basic steps. Now, in my example, I already populated this. I had track changes turned on. I decided I wanted to insert some annotations in here. In fact, I'll come up to my review. I added an annotation on this particular step. It changed, Flare changed or tracked the fact that I deleted step number 4. I inserted an annotation as to why. Flare, I added step number 9 and Flare tracked that. Now we can take these changes and these annotations and preserve them if we want when we go to Word and into PDF. So in the past, you know, all of this track changes was great, but they went poof the minute we generated our print-based outputs. So let's go ahead and do a build and see what this looks like. So I'm going to let's do Word for example. A couple things I want to point out. If you want to preserve the track changes, if you've got that enabled in Flare and you want to preserve it in your print-based or your Word-based outputs, come down to the Advanced tab in your target, and you have this new option here called Preserve Track Changes. That's going to take everything you've been doing in your Flare project on a track changes basis and preserve it in your output. The other option you've got is this check mark box called Enable Review Mode and Output. What that does is when we build our Word output and we send it to our subject matter experts for review, track changes, or when they open up Word, that review or that track changes capability in Word is already turned on. You save them a step to even have to go up to the menu to turn it on. It's hard enough sometimes to get the feedback. Let's make it even that much easier for them to enable the review process. So I'm going to go ahead and build it. And let's take a look at what it looks like. So when we open it up, give Word a second here, come down to my basic steps. You'll see my track changes was already enabled here. And all those little annotations and edits I made were preserved in Flare. So this may look a little bit different depending on the Word version that you've got. And I learned that even depending on the version of Word you have, you can configure it to show these kinds of things differently. This is just how mine is set up. So deletions show up here. Additions in my version of Word show up with these little change bars, and if I hover over it, it tells me what I actually inserted. So that's what it looks like in Word. I can also do it in my PDF, so let's build that guy and have a look. Oh, he's already built, so I'll bring him up. So in PDF, it looks a little bit different. We've got this sort of obvious red change bar effect. So if I hover over here, it tells me what I deleted or what I added. And in the PDF reader, I've actually got this option here, this little comment button. And when I turn this on, this kind of exposes everything. If I click on this annotation here on the right-hand side, Reader highlights where I inserted that annotation. As I come down here to what I deleted, it highlights this step 4 because I deleted it. Here's my addition, my step 9. So it looks a little bit different than Microsoft Word, but still everything is there. Again, this can really help with the review workflow. It doesn't replace the benefits of MadCap Contributor, But in some cases, using Word or PDF as your review channel is just simply more appropriate. You know, again, you don't want to fight to get the reviews and the feedback, so we want to make it a little bit easier to put it in content or into a tool that maybe some of your subject matter experts or reviewers are more easily familiar with and maybe more encouraged to use. You may have a need to archive some of these changes in your Word or PDF output for some, you know, internal procedures or maybe internal regulatory processes, so now you have that option. I do want to make quick mention that this is a one-way street. The annotations, so again, if you haven't already asked this question, I'll go ahead and ask it for you all. The annotations and the additional changes that you in the Word doc, once you spit out a Word file, for example, with these changes enabled and you start passing around, they don't come back into Flare, those additional annotations. You know, we got a lot of feedback from users who were looking for this feature, and they really needed it to be a one-way street. So they needed to preserve it in the print-based outputs, again, either to make it easier for the review process to happen within a Microsoft Word environment or PDF, or have those changes tracked and preserved in an archive. So just a little clarity there. All right, let's switch gears. I want to come back into Flare. The next thing I want to talk about is the improvements we've made to glossaries. I'll pull up my glossary here. So we improved the way Flare handles glossary terms with the support of stemming, case sensitivity, a force sorting behavior of a term, and the ability to apply a condition to a glossary term. So let's take a look at some of that. We'll start with the stemming. So I'm going to open up my term text here, and if I double click on it, it's going to pull up the properties of that term. So that hasn't changed. That should look familiar. I've got my term, I've got my definition, but I have some new stuff to choose from. One of them is ignore case and automatic link creation. If I check that box, if I'm building my glossary in my outputs and I'm telling Flare to automatically create the glossary for me, this is going to ignore the uppercase and lowercase t in this instance. So this will find text with a capital T, and it'll find text with a lowercase t. We also have the ability to stem words and include term variants when we're doing an automatic link creation, and that's what this option is here. So what this does is it finds all variants of the word text. So texting, texted, text with an S at the end. So notice that if I check this, this one's automatically grayed out and checked for me because that case sensitivity is already part of that stemming algorithm. The other thing we can do is do a force a sort for a term. So this can be helpful if, and I'll pull up my term body here. So this can be helpful if maybe a glossary term starts, maybe it's a number, maybe it's a code tag, like a code element like I've got here in my example. I can actually force where this shows up in my glossary list. So in previous versions, numbers, code tags like this, they'd all bubble up to the top of your glossary list no matter what. Now we can put more of a force sorting behavior on the term. So I'm putting mine under B. I force sort HTML under the H, and my editor here tells me this. In fact, I'm going to come back here and preserve that there. And the editor also tells me now that I've got variants and ignore case selected for this particular word. I also did a force sort on 9, so I'm going to sort this under 9 in my glossary. So again, this sorting is really important. You know, if you're working with multilingual outputs, particularly when you're using character sets that should be sorted phonetically, this comes in, this is a really important thing, and we see this a lot with some double byte languages such as Japanese. So this feature is really great if you're building glossaries with those languages in mind. Okay, so what does this look like? So let's go ahead and have a look. Go back into my content here. I've got some topics, or I have a topic with these glossary terms. So this is what it looks like as you would expect. One thing I do want to point out, if I wanted to insert a glossary term link, let me go ahead and do that right now. So here's my term. I'd like to make this a glossary term link. I'll come up to my insert menu, hit glossary term link. I can actually choose any glossary term I want. in previous versions, the text and your term had to match, or else you couldn't add, you couldn't make it a link. So now I can choose any glossary term I want and link it to this text. So I'm going to just choose my term here, but that is something new in this version. So let's give it a build and see how this looks. Actually, before I do, let me take a step back. The last thing I want to mention in the glossary is the ability to put a conditional marker on a term. So let me come back to my term body. You have this option down here now for conditional text. I can actually choose to apply a conditional tag to the term. So what that means is when we decide we want to exclude that condition when we build, let's say we're including this particular glossary in an output and we're telling the output to exclude this red conditional marker here, it's not going to remove the text. It's going to remove the glossary behavior or that glossary term link on the word body. So the term or the word will actually be there in my topic. It's just not going to be anything that I can click and have a definition pop up, and it's not going to show up in my glossary list either. So again, you're not removing the content, we're just removing the glossary behavior. So I've got that applied. So let's build this and see what it looks like. Let's take a look at the top nav option here. So let me give it a build. So it's going to look a little bit different. Let me pull him up and we'll see here. Let me expand him out. Let me make it a little bit bigger. Okay, so let me pull up the glossary. So let me just have a look. We'll look at some of the forced sorting behavior. So if you remember, I didn't do anything with the title tag, so that shows up as expected. My body tag is under my B, my HTML tag is under H, and the number 9 here is included under the 9s. If we come back to our PDF, we'll take a look at what that looks like. I'll make sure that my conditional tag is excluded, and there he is. So let's build it, and hopefully we can see this example. Oh, look, I think the PDF looks a little bit better. So if I look at my welcome topic, if you remember, I had that conditional marker applied to the glossary term body. So I excluded that condition. It didn't remove the word, but it just removed that glossary behavior. So he's still there. If I go to the glossary that I created, again, all my sorting is preserved, but you'll notice that the word body doesn't show up at all in my glossary list because I excluded it. So again, now we can apply these glossary or these conditions to glossary terms and turn off the behavior. If you use, this may or may not apply, but if you do have a lot of glossaries in your project, it may potentially eliminate the number of glossaries you have to maintain, because if you have different versions of the glossary you want to put out there, you don't have to have a different glossary. Maybe some of the terms need to be included, some of them don't. You can simply use a conditional term to exclude it from a particular target. So again, it may reduce the number of glossaries that you have to maintain. Okay, so we're coming up on our time here. Just want to point out a couple of other things. Let me bring up the Flare 12 help system so that we can come back to it. So a couple other little minor things I want to mention. We do offer 64-bit support for Flare 12, so hopefully you'll see some improved performance, some performance improvement there. We have SSH support for those who are using Git. I know a lot of you have requested that support, so if you are using Git as your source control repository, hopefully you're happy to hear that we now support SSH. We also have improved support for working with equations. So for those of you who need to insert equations, you can now easily insert LaTeX or MathML equations using any third-party tool. They're still inserted into the editor and compiled as images, but when you generate your online outputs, now you have the choice to render them as either PNG or SVGs and our online outputs. In PDFs, they'll default to SVG. But again, added support for both equation markup languages, both LaTeX and MathML, and you can insert that code using, grabbing it from any third-party editor, inserting into the Flare editor, which they'll render for you, and then you can choose between SVG or PNG in your online outputs now. All right, so that's a lot of what I wanted to cover today. I did want to bring your attention back to the Flare 12 help system. Up in the menu here, if you come to what's new, there's a topic that goes over all of the major features that I covered today and some additional new features that I just didn't have time to cover. There's a lot in here. I didn't have time. There's for those of you who want to take a look or doing Microsoft Word outputs, I'd encourage you to read through some of the Microsoft Word enhancements. We've got some additional support for advanced sorting on tables, a lot of new features that I just didn't have time to go over. So I wanted to direct you back to this What's New page so that you can read more about it on your own. If you haven't already downloaded a trial, if you're not getting Flare 12 free as part of your current maintenance plan, the trial is available to tinker and download, and we can help answer any questions that you have. I do want to pop quickly back over to PowerPoint. So give me a second here while I try to elegantly do this. I do want to make quick mention of MadWorld. It's right around the corner. If you haven't already registered, I hope you will. And if you have, we're very much looking forward to seeing you. I want to mention, if you've never come to MadWorld before, or if you're thinking about it, we have what's called our hospitality lounge open the whole time. So this is in addition to all of the sessions that we're offering. The hospitality lounge is going to be staffed by our senior members of our support team, R&D, Q&A. It's a great place to come if you've got project-specific questions. We're going to have workstations set up all over the place, or you can come with your own laptop or your project on a thumb drive. You can, belly up to the bar and ask any of the experts any questions you've got on your project. We'll have many of the speakers will be there, so you can ask them questions. It's just a great way to network and talk to the people that built the software, talk to some of those support reps that you've been talking to over time, and get that over-the-shoulder project-specific help. So I wanted to make mention of that. The next thing I want to talk about quickly, as a registered attendee, you get $100 off 2 courses. We've completely redesigned and revamped the MadCap Flare Responsive HTML5 class. I'd encourage you to pop up to our website. We have if it's not up today, it should be up hopefully within the hour or so, the new outline for the MadCap Flare Responsive HTML5 class. We're going to be talking everything about a responsive design overview, things to consider when writing in a responsive world. How do the media queries in the style sheet, how does that tie into the responsive layout editor? How do we use that layout editor? So a lot of new stuff added to that class. It's 2 half-days online and 1 full day in person. So pop up to the website and have a look at the modules that we're going to cover, because it looks good. And then we also have our MadCap Flare project management and team authoring class coming up right on the back side of that. So you get $100 off. Both of these classes are normally $5.99 a person. And again, it's $4.99 for registering for today's webinar. So contact your sales rep or contact us at sales@madcapsoftware.com. Feel free to email me, and I'm happy to direct you. So with that, I just want to thank everybody. I hope that you got a lot out of this. I hope that you're inspired to get installed and tinker around. Let us know how we can answer any questions, and hope to see you again for another webinar or at MadWorld as well. So thanks, everybody. We don't have any time to get to all of the great questions that have come in, but we'll go ahead and compile a list and send them out to everybody that's attended. So thanks again. Have a great rest of the week, and hope to talk to you all soon.